Our topic today, Robin and I discussed some different ideas, and we really kind of came up with how do we live a balanced life. As caregivers or people that have Parkinson's, that can be a real tough thing, where you're trying to balance a lot of different things and a lot of different changes in your life. So today I'm going to talk about different strategies that may be helpful. Hopefully you can come away today with a couple of tools, or maybe just thinking about a different way of thinking about things. So we'll jump right in. This is me. I'll put up my email at the end of the session too. If you have any questions, feel free to jot that email down and send me a note if you want any more information. I'm going to start with our territorial acknowledgement. CMHA Waterloo Wellington offices are situated on multiple treaty lands that form the traditional and sacred territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Attawandaron peoples, who are the original inhabitants of this land. Our offices in the place that we call our Guelph, Waterloo Region, and County of Wellington are situated on land promised by the Government of Canada to the Six Nations of the Grand River and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island call Waterloo Wellington home today. And with this territorial acknowledgement, we honor and pay our respects to the ancestors who have gone and those still present. I recognize that not all of us that are in this today are from the Guelph, Waterloo region or County of Wellington, but I encourage you to kind of learn a little bit more about the communities that you're in and how we use our land. So today we're going to cover, I've got 4 different things that I'd like to talk about today. First one is boundary setting. Then we're going to roll into time management, leaning on others, because that's really important when we're maybe needing a little bit more help. And then the last one is self-care. So really sort of thinking about ourselves and what we need in that self-care piece. So I'm going to dive right into our boundaries to start with. And boundaries, when I'm talking about boundaries today, I'm really talking about personal boundaries. So things that are to do with ourselves. And when we think about boundaries, we're looking at rules or guidelines or limits that a person creates to identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for others to behave towards them. So really, to put it simply, it's kind of just a rule that you may have that you feel safe and you feel comfortable. And depending on the situation, those boundaries could be different, or who we're socializing with, or who's asking us to do things. We may have different boundaries. So I want to talk about this because sometimes that boundary setting is really important when we are maybe feeling overwhelmed, or we're looking for that balance in our life. So there's a few different boundary types that I want to talk about today. One of them, the first one I'm going to talk about, is physical. So those boundaries are things like, it could be something like how close you want to be with somebody physically. So do you like hugs? Do you want someone to pat you on the shoulder? Do you like that physical touch? It could be even physical things like boundaries on eating, sleeping. If somebody's saying, hey, I want you to get up at 6 in the morning every morning, and you're not a morning person, or maybe that's changed in your lifetime. Those are like those physical boundaries that you may want to think about. Emotional boundaries are more about your thoughts and your feelings. So something to remember on that is that we aren't always able to change other people's feelings or their thoughts, but we do have our own thoughts and feelings that we can kind of control. So we don't want to disregard people, but we want to make sure that we're aware of our own emotions and feelings, and we can set those rules where we don't want people to cross the line if that's making us feel uncomfortable. Intellectual boundaries, and this one is sometimes hard if we're aging or we're requiring more care, is our ability to make our own decisions, control our own thoughts, and maybe be able to express that to people like, hey, I kind of want to have the decision-making ability to let you know what I want to do today. Or, making decisions on things around the house. Maybe those are those intellectual decisions that you're wanting to have that set boundaries or rules or guidelines for people to follow. Sexual boundaries are what are we okay with and what are we not? And when I talk to youth about this, a lot of that is to do with consent. So are we okay with what's happening? Do we want to communicate things with our partner or who maybe we are interacting with? Material boundaries are something that comes up, I find a lot when I'm working with seniors, in that we want to be clear on things maybe that belong to us. So maybe it's something like, please don't go into my purse or my wallet without my permission. Or I don't want you going through my bathroom cupboards without me knowing that you're going through my bathroom cupboards. Things like money, borrowing, taking things out of your home, that type of thing would be those material things. Again, if I was talking to youth, sometimes I'll say, if a classmate were to borrow their sweatshirt, do they want that sweatshirt back right away? Or are they okay with that kid wearing that hoodie for 3 weeks straight? So it would be the same in a caregiver or as we're aging setting of, if you've got kids coming back to your house and saying, hey, I'm going to take that lazy boy chair, I really like it. Set those boundaries to make sure that those material things, if you've got a guideline that you want to set, that's a boundary. And then time is could be how we spend our time or who we spend our time with. And this is tough sometimes because we get a lot of asks in our life. So it could be that you're very clear on your boundaries of, I can help you for an hour on Tuesday, and that's your boundary. Or it might be, I will not be going to that party on Friday night. I just can't do it. That would be a boundary that you'd be setting regarding time. So boundary setting is something that I think is really important to think about, because things come up and we maybe are kind of like, oh shoot, I wish I didn't commit to that, or I wish I'd set a rule or a guideline for somebody. And I kind of want to talk about that because there's different types of boundaries that we might fall under. And you'll probably recognize yourself in some of these, because sometimes I'm really clear on my boundaries and sometimes I'm kind of wishy-washy. So a rigid boundary is when we're unmovable. That's why I've kind of put that picture of a brick wall with that stop sign on it. We wouldn't change our boundaries even if we have new information. Our minds, we can't be convinced to change our boundaries. It's kind of that black and white, or right or wrong, or good or bad. And we might miss out on a lot of new information, or we might miss out on an opportunity to compromise. We can kind of fall into the trap of not considering others, thinking that we're right, even though we might not be. And sometimes it's like kind of that pushing your way through, like, everybody has to do this because I'm right. And that can often lead to kind of this feeling of isolation or feeling like people aren't going to be able to communicate with you. There are a couple of times when those rigid boundaries are really important. So if it was something, trying to think of an example might be, I don't ever want to be hit. That's a really rigid boundary for me. So if somebody were to be violent or abusive to me, that's a boundary. I would leave. I'm not gonna, if I was caring for someone, that might be different, where I might need support or I might need to put safety parameters in place so that doesn't happen again. But I'm not going to accept violence or abuse. So that would be a rigid boundary. For the most part, rigid boundaries aren't really the way to go because we're learning new information all the time. So sometimes we can kind of compromise a little bit. I'm sure you all know someone in your life throughout your lifetime that was that right or wrong personality, and sometimes it feels a little abrasive. Weak boundaries are the complete opposite. And this happens when we're maybe uncertain of what our boundaries are. So we're not sure if we like this, or we're not sure if we're feeling safe. When that happens, a lot of times people just ignore your boundaries and they walk right through them. So that picture there, I've kind of got this low grassy fence where people can just kind of walk through in the picture. So an example might be that I would say, I'm not going to give you a loan. I don't want to give you a loan. I don't loan out money. And then someone challenges me and says, but I promise I'll pay you back next month. And then I say, oh, okay. All right, here's the money. People learn that they can kind of push through your boundaries. So having really weak boundaries isn't a great thing either, because it's like there's no boundary at all. So another example could be if a parent says, I want to take you off of our phone bill, our cell phone bill plan, because you're not paying us back. And then someone says, oh, I promise you I won't add up my charges anymore. I'll pay you back. I'm sure it'll be fine. And then you just kind of keep them on your plan because it's easier sometimes to avoid that conflict. That means that they're not going to respect your boundaries, and you kind of, you just keep having people kind of walk through. So they're easily dismissed. There's no follow through on boundaries. That would be what a weak boundary is. Sometimes people will say, is that what enabling is? I don't know if you've heard that term before, but that enabling, where you're allowing people to do things and you're kind of enabling. I kind of think enabling sometimes has a lot of judgment to it. And I kind of think it's almost like it's like problematic helping, where there's a problem and you're not really helping that person solve it. You're just avoiding the conflict. So a weak boundary is not really something that we want either. What we want is kind of in the middle, and that's semi-permeable boundaries. I've got a gate picture there because that gate can open and close. People can go through it. But if we need to be firm, we'll shut the gate. If we're okay with our boundaries maybe changing a bit, if we've got more information, we can kind of open up that gate a little bit too. So that's really what we're aiming for, is kind of being flexible, but being consistent, having follow through, and using our judgment on it. As a parent, that's what I always try to do, is have those flexible, semi-permeable boundaries. To be honest, probably out of my husband and I have the weaker boundaries, and it's, my husband is a little more rigid and firm. But together we try to have that semi-permeable, where we have that kind of flow where, okay, in this situation, we'll change it a little bit, but now we need to pull back. But the point of a semi-permeable boundary would be that you're able to keep your boundaries, you're able to follow through, and you can use information to kind of change things. And that really builds to healthy relationships. So healthy boundaries, I've got a list of things on that screen that you can kind of read through, but it's really important for balance. So things like, I'll just pull through a few of them out. Saying no without guilt. That's a big one, right? If someone's asking you to do something else, or maybe go somewhere on the weekend, you're exhausted, and you can say no. You can say, nope, my boundary this weekend is I need time for myself, and we need to just kind of relax at home. Or maybe it's asserting yourself. Maybe it's being firm with someone and saying, I'm not going to loan you that money, or we really need more help. Please come and help us. Those are, that assertive piece is really good for healthy boundaries. So some other ones are taking care of yourself, protecting your own property, participating in healthy relationships. Those are all things to do with healthy boundaries. What gets in the way of creating these boundaries? There are definitely barriers for boundary setting. Oftentimes it could be kind of we're uncertain, or we're trying to avoid that conflict. And I know that happens in our household sometimes, where I think, it's just easier just to let it go. It could be that we're lacking confidence to assert those boundaries. We could even be fearful sometimes of what happens if I set that boundary in place, and we may feel guilty. That's a big one that we'll talk about too when we get into self-care, is kind of setting, because we tend to give and give and give all the time. And when someone asks us to do something, or someone's pushing through some of those guidelines that make us feel safe, sometimes we feel guilty about it. Any of these things kind of make it hard to assert ourselves. But as we set boundaries and we think about our boundaries and practice them, we kind of get more assertive and we get more confident, and people realize, hey, okay, I know that Laura's not going to let me walk into her garden and pluck all her cucumbers out of the garden. That's a boundary she has. And they would know that they're not allowed to do that. So I encourage you to really kind of think about, if there's pieces in your life that you're feeling like, oh, I just don't feel good when so-and-so does that, or I wish I'd set that rule so that people know that that's not acceptable. practice it. Practice trying to figure out what those boundaries are and start being a bit more assertive on them and communicate with people about them. And you may find that it kind of creates that balance or that confidence that you're thinking, okay, I'm feeling better about how I'm being treated, or I'm feeling better about my schedule in the day. I'm feeling better about allowing myself to have a little bit of time for myself. Those are all really good things to do with boundaries. Boundaries are not about controlling someone else. They're about our own needs. So think about that too, in that you're not creating all these rules and regulations so that you can be bossy, or so that you can just tell people how assertive you are. You're doing it so that you can be aware of your own needs and make sure that people are respecting those needs and that you're kind of taking care of yourself. You can't change how other people think. But you can kind of change your expectations and how you want to be treated yourself. So think about that too, in that it's not that you're trying to control other people, it's that you're trying to create those safety rules so that you feel safe and comfortable and secure. I'm going to give you, I'll read a couple of these out because I don't need to read them all because you can kind of follow them on the screen. But I find sometimes it's good to have examples of unhelpful thoughts that we may have and then how we would build a healthy boundary around it. So I'll do the first one. It says, it doesn't matter what they're saying or doing to me. As long as I keep quiet, they'll eventually leave me alone. So that's kind of an unhealthy thought. You're kind of avoiding, right? You're avoiding that conflict or you're avoiding that confrontation. So instead, building boundaries would be, I will stand up for myself and assert my right to be respected and not hurt. If they choose to ignore me, then I have the right to leave, to ask them to leave, or to get help. So that's a different frame of thought, right? It's the same situation, but instead of just saying, I'm going to ignore this and hopefully they go away or leave me alone, I'm going to take control and I'm going to set that boundary. I'll skip down to the second last one. I feel guilty if I do something by myself and leave my best friend out. That's an unhelpful thought because I'm feeling guilty about it. If I'm building a boundary, I could say, I have the right to do things that are uniquely mine and explore my own interests and hobbies so that I don't become so overly enmeshed that I lose my identity. So that's setting that boundary for your own kind of self-care. It's okay if you do things on your own or you don't do something with somebody all the time. That would be building a healthy boundary. And then the last one would be, I can never say no to others. That's an unhelpful thought, right? And sometimes that happens where we think, oh, I don't want to say no to them, or I feel bad if I don't do this. Building healthy boundaries example would be, I have a right to say no to others if they are making me uncomfortable or asking me to compromise my beliefs and values. I can also say no if I'm feeling overwhelmed. That's a great boundary, right? If you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to say no. And people can recognize that and be like, okay, I think Laura's just got too much on her plate. We'll let that one go. So think about some of those things in your life where maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable, or maybe you think things aren't sitting right, and decide, do I need to reframe my thought and maybe figure out what that boundary is that I'll feel better about it. When you're setting boundaries, allow sufficient time for conversation with the person. Be really clear and direct. Use I statements, and we'll get back to that one. Be consistent, be realistic, be assertive, and then only set boundaries you can stick to. So don't have a big long list of a million boundaries that you're not really sure that you can stick to, but kind of that consistency and being realistic and being assertive are really important. I'm going to talk about I statements now because this is a really good one when you're communicating. And maybe many of you already know this technique, but I messages are less threatening. You messages often feel judgmental and critical. So using an I message tends to work better than a you message, and I'll explain that. Oftentimes when you say you did this or you made me feel this way, it's really kind of confrontational and it shuts communication down. If we change it and say, I feel frustrated or I feel sad when this happens, it more puts the onus on yourself and that opens up the conversation. So an example would be same situation. Let's say I say to my husband when I get home from work, you always leave a mess everywhere. He automatically would kind of step back and think, okay, what's going on here? She's being very accusing. If instead I used an I statement, I might say, I feel frustrated when I come home and the house is really messy. It's a big difference, right? You leave a mess everywhere, or I feel frustrated when I come home and the house is messy. Or another example would be, you don't care about my feelings. Maybe I would say instead, I feel frustrated when my feelings aren't acknowledged. So a big difference in the I and the you statement. Is it hard to do? Yes, it's very hard to do, right? But if you can practice that language, it is a lot easier when you're setting boundaries so that that person doesn't feel that accusation or already feel like, I don't want to talk about it. So a goal for you would be to practice I statements. And one of the strategies to do this is either with somebody that you know well, or even with yourself in front of the mirror. Try and talk for about 3 minutes using only I statements. So explain something you really like and start every statement with the word I, and practice trying to reframe those sentences so that it's always I. So try that, see if that works. Okay, time management. How do we increase effectiveness and efficiency? How do we prioritize? And how do we feel more in control and less overwhelmed? So this is a big question when we think about time management and all of the different things that we may have in our lives that maybe would be helpful in our time management techniques, or all those things that we have in our lives that we want to prioritize. So let's talk a little bit about time management techniques. The first one I want to talk about is making a plan. So making a plan is an important technique because oftentimes we have a long to-do list or endless obligations that we've got, and we don't know where to start. We're not sure what to do about it. I've got a list of things on our make a plan that I think are important. First one is breaking those larger things into smaller chunks. So sometimes things are more manageable if we can break them into pieces. So an example would be with my messy house again. If I know I have to clean my whole house, it's overwhelming to me. If I start by just clearing off a coffee table, that's doable, right? Those smaller chunks are doable. Another one would be setting priorities. So maybe we determine the importance of a task. We try and do those high priority ones first. It can be easy maybe to get lost in our big list. So let's try and prioritize our tasks so that we can do those important things first. Sometimes I'll use a highlighter. I'll do a to-do list and I'll do a highlighter of all the things I need to do first. Another thing we want to do is focus on our strengths. So we really want to figure out what we did well. So maybe instead of saying, oh, my house is still a mess, I can say, yay, I cleaned the coffee table, right? I've kind of done something really good. Pay attention to the things you do well, and it boosts your confidence to get the next thing done. So that's a good time management technique. Another one would be reward yourself. So reward yourself in the accomplishments that you did. That actually creates a really good loop in your brain where it evokes a positive emotion, and then you want to do it again. An example would be yesterday I was at a wellness fair, and there was a gentleman there that was talking about how he hates going to the gym. But every time he goes to the gym, he rewards himself with some amazing smoothie that he only drinks when he goes to the gym. That's his reward for that accomplishment. And he said that's the only way he can kind of get into that habit or get that done, is that he knows he's looking forward to this smoothie after he's at the gym. So that's rewarding yourself. And then also think about your needs, not just your obligations. So think about things and add things to your list that are your own needs. So maybe you're setting aside time for yourself for something really important, or maybe you're making sure you're done obligations at a certain time so that you open up time. For me, I always block, like after 5 p.m. on a Friday, I block out that time so that I don't have anything else on my list. I know by 5 o'clock on Friday, I don't want to do anything else. So if someone were to ask me, Laura, can you stay late on Friday until 6:30? I would say, I'm sorry, that's blocked off on my calendar. Or if I have someone say, hey, could you just do a couple errands on the way home on a Friday? I say, no, I'm going home. So that I know that that's really important for me, that I want to block that time off. So thinking about your own needs is really important on your plan. And then be kind to yourself. Part of making a plan is being kind and forgetting about things that maybe you messed up. It's okay if you're not perfect. I think life is a continuation of learning and keeping on going. So be kind. And then the last one is ask for help. So asking for assistance when you need it. It's okay to ask for help, and it's actually a sign of strength. Sometimes we need to delegate. Sometimes we need to clear things off our list, and that allows us to open up space. It allows us to open up time, which I think is really important. Okay, this one looks a little more official, this slide. This is a time management matrix. For those of you that I spoke with in June, this may look similar, but I've actually tweaked it because I did a little more research on this, and I like this layout a little bit better. This is the time management matrix, but it's also sometimes called the Eisenhower matrix. And it was originally conceived by Eisenhower and then later refined by someone named Stephen Covey, and he wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So basically, this matrix provides a way to prioritize your responsibilities. It's important to kind of figure out on the vertical axis, those are important and not important things. And then on the horizontal, it's urgent and not urgent. And sometimes we mix that stuff up, right? We kind of think everything's urgent, or something comes in and we think, I have to do this right now, it's so important. If we can figure out our priorities to manage our time to fit into these quadrants, it's really helpful. So important tasks are things that maybe can contribute to our own well-being. They're sometimes kind of more complex, whereas urgent tasks require immediate attention. Often we feel rushed or we feel hurried because we feel like we have to react to those urgent tasks. It should be easy to figure out what's urgent and what's important, but sometimes we kind of get mixed up, and those urgent tasks often kind of we get done right away. Maybe they weren't that important after all. So I want you to kind of think about sometimes on your list of things to do, what's really urgent, what's really important, and how do I prioritize it? That quadrant 4 is a delete one. Sometimes there are things that we come up and we really don't need to do them at all. Right? So think about that in your head too. So quadrant 1 is high importance and high urgency. So those are those things that you really should get done. You should do them. That's why the word do is there. An example would be, I got a final notice on my hydro bill. That's really important. I need hydro, and it's really urgent. It's the final notice. So that would be quadrant 1, where I have to do it right away. Quadrant 2 is things that could be scheduled to be completed. They're really important, but maybe they're not that urgent. So that could be that same hydro bill, but maybe it's not the final notice. Maybe I just got it in the mail. It's due in a couple of weeks. I can schedule it for after I get paid, and I can put that in quadrant 2. Quadrant 3 are urgent, but not very important. They're kind of a distraction maybe, but really they're not, they're not that important, but maybe it's like of a high urgency because it needs to be done soon. So an example that I would give would be, maybe my friend texts me today and says, oh my gosh, last minute, I'm having a potluck dinner tonight. I need a dessert. Please bring me a dessert. It seems really urgent because it's today. But is a dessert really important? Probably not. I could delegate that. I could stop at the grocery store or a bakery on the way, pick up a pie, and I could take it. It's not that important, but it's pretty urgent because it's happening today. And then the last quadrant is 4, and that's those things that are low importance and not urgent. They could be eliminated or they could be at the bottom of our list. Oftentimes they're time wasters, really. They're things that don't really need to be done. They're not important. An example might be that I'm stuck on the couch watching endless television, and I just keep watching the same thing over and over again. I'm not really interested in it. The time doesn't really have any value. And I probably should have stopped doing it and gone on to do other things that maybe would be either more important, more urgent, or maybe just more enjoyable. So that's the time management matrix. I want you to kind of think about that when you're going about your day of things. I like the idea of some things you can do, some things you can schedule, some things you can delegate, and some things you can delete. So those are some things we want to think about with the time matrix. Okay, I have been talking for about half an hour. I want to just take a few minutes to do this breathing exercise. And while you're doing the breathing exercise, I have to run because apparently the plug on my laptop is malfunctioning. So I need to get another plug. So I'm going to get you to do this Take 5 exercise. I want you to sit in a comfortable position with both feet on the floor and your hands resting in your lap. So I want you to do that. Then close your eyes or find a spot on the floor or your lap where you can rest your eyes. So feet on the floor, close your eyes or stare down maybe at your lap. Then I want you to turn one palm up so that it's facing to the ceiling. And then you're going to use that hand to count your breaths. Gently inhale through your nose until your lungs are full, and then slowly exhale through your mouth. Tuck your finger into your palm and continue breathing until all 5 fingers are folded in. So take those 5 deep breaths for me. Okay, very good. That's an example of using a breathing technique just to take a little break. And that breathing is slowing down our breathing. It's regulating our heart rate, can lower tension, it can lower stress. So sometimes in the middle of the day, if you need a little more balance, it's important to kind of figure that out then. Maybe just take a few more breaths. Okay, third topic of conversation is leaning on others. This is a really important one. When I read this quote, you're going to automatically have this song in your head. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. So when we think about caregiving and we think about the stress and sometimes feeling unbalanced, we need to really remember it's okay to lean on others. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to maybe work as a team to kind of support each other. There's a fellow named Milton Olson who was a naturalist. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he studied geese a lot, and he wrote lessons kind of based on the life of a goose. And I think it's really applicable to our topic today. I'm sure you've all seen it when geese are flying in that V formation. Milton Olson kind of documented that and said he noticed that there's that uplift. You know, when geese are flying in formation, it makes it easier for all those geese behind to fly. And studies have shown, I think it's over 70% better mileage that geese get when they're flying in that formation. So if they're flying alone, it's a lot harder. It's not as efficient. It's not as effective. And then if that lead bird gets tired, so that could be if you're that primary caregiver or you're the person that's doing all the work and you get tired, somebody else takes a turn and you can kind of fall to the back. Sometimes a bird will get out of formation, and that drag or resistance of flying alone quickly makes them flap a little faster to get back into formation so that they can do that teamwork. I want you to think about that when you are reluctant to ask for help, or maybe you're feeling vulnerable. It's okay to be that goose. It's okay to fly in formation and ask for help and get that support. Sometimes it's scary, and there's some articles on that too, where people are afraid to ask for help because it means that change is coming, or it means there's a new way to do things, or you're ready to do something different. So think of it as a sign of bravery. Think of it as a sign of strength. We were talking about being that goose and how it's okay to feel vulnerable, and it's that sign of strength really to ask for help, to reach out. And I think that's really important to remember when we're in that caregiver role, where it's really tough to sometimes ask for help or need that support. So if you don't remember anything from this webinar, except for my goose analogy, that's wonderful, because I think it's really important to lean on each other and ask for that help. Asking for help and leaning in are not a sign of weakness. So I really want you to remember that asking for help is really a sign of bravery, and it's a sign that you're ready to change things up. And helping others, so even if you're asking for that help and you're thinking, I don't know if I want to ask that person for help, leads me to one of my favorite topics, and that is kindness. So asking for help and receiving that help, that's really part of being human. It's that kindness piece. So I just want a quick touch on the kindness factor, because kindness is good for everybody. And I want to read that again. Kindness is good for everybody. So leaning on others is a wonderful thing. There's all kinds of studies about the power of kindness. It's good for connections. It's good for feeling good, positive environment, our physical health, our mental health. And kindness is usually returned. It's actually contagious. So if I do something good for you, you may do something good for me in return. I thought I'd quickly talk about that mental health piece of kindness, and being aware that, it's a really wonderful thing that kind of makes the world go round. The University of British Columbia did a study about anxiety with kindness, and they had people join the study with high levels of anxiety. And they assigned those people to perform 6 acts of kindness to others each week. So that was the only difference between 2 groups of people. One group was assigned to do 6 acts of kindness in a week. That group had significantly lower levels of anxiety at the end of the study, because they're finding those acts of kindness really do kind of lower your feelings of anxiousness. They maybe boost your self-esteem. They give you that sense of purpose. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Kindness is a wonderful thing. It's free, doesn't require a prescription, doesn't cost any money. It's a wonderful thing. Which leads me to my last topic of conversation today on my list, which is self-care. And this piece is a tough one sometimes, because we really need to think about how we look after ourselves. Self-care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of mental, emotional, physical, and social aspects in our life. It seems like a simple concept,